Hello, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today, where we will be concentrating on Cyber Essentials, a refresher on Cyber Essentials because we've seen some changes and the new Danzell update. And we're going to take you through today what we're seeing as part of those changes and how we can support you on that journey. So just as an introduction as to who I am, so I'm Emma Portlock. I'm our cybersecurity sales specialist here at BCN. I'm also kind of an experienced account manager. I work with both our clients here at BCN and potential prospects, really honing in on that security speciality. And over to you, Carly.
Thanks, Emma. I'm Carly Woodward, Head of Information Security at BCN. Accountable for security internally at BCN, as well as our customer-facing security services, one of which is the delivery of Cyber Essentials for customers. Been helping customers to get Cyber Essentials certified now for over 10 years. And the changes this year are well worth an update and a bit of a refresher. So happy to run those through with you today, and I'll pass over to Dan.
I'm Dan Hoult. I work on the RIPS team at BCN, so that's the team that heads up all things Cyber Essentials, vulnerability management and remediation, and we're also starting to branch out into patching. So as part of my role, I've had a lot to do with the Cyber Essentials schemes in terms of looking at the Willow scheme as previously and the Danzell scheme that we're taking on now, as well as all things scope and remediations related to it.
Amazing, thanks, Dan. And what amazing names they dream up for Cyber Essentials as well, hey? So what we will cover today, so we're going to run you through 4 areas. We're going to go through Cyber Essentials as a refresher. So what is Cyber Essentials? Why does it pay off? Why do we need Cyber Essentials? Why is it important? We're then going to look at the basic versus the plus. So what's the difference? What does basic give you? What does plus give you? And would it be worth your investment in sort of going forwards that way? So obviously the new naming convention, the Danzell update, and this is version 3.3. There are actually some reasonably significant changes this year, so we're just going to go through what's changed. And then finally, and probably most importantly, what does that mean to you? You know, what are the gotchas? What do you need to do now? And how much time do you need to leave yourselves to prepare? So I'm now going to hand over to Carly and Dan, who are going to take you through kind of the meat of this. So over to you guys from now on.
Okay, so what is Cyber Essentials? If you've never done Cyber Essentials before, or even if you're familiar with it, it is a UK government-backed certification. The basic idea and premise behind it is that if the Cyber Essentials controls are properly implemented, your organization should be protected against around about 80% of the most common threats that are out in the cyber landscape. So we would typically suggest to any organization, big or small, no matter what vertical, Cyber Essentials is where any organization should start, because it lays the groundwork for good hygiene across the board. There are 5 key controls within Cyber Essentials that covers firewalls, secure configuration, update management and user access control, as well as malware protection. And these controls haven't changed. Those 5 controls have been the 5 controls basically since the scheme started many, many years ago. But the requirements have changed over time within those controls to make sure that the certification is relevant to the threats that are in play today. And Dan, would you say that any of these controls would be difficult for any organization to achieve?
As a general rule, the controls are fairly standard on the implementation. It's on the more nuanced side. Specifically, if you're working in manufacturing and healthcare, I think the user access control bit can often be a bit problematic if you're thinking about things like dispatch stations and kiosk systems. I think is one of the common pitfalls and gotchas.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we would typically say that most of these controls are fairly straightforward to organizations to implement. The cost of implementation of any controls should be relatively low, and therefore we really recommend that all organizations look to achieve Cyber Essentials, no matter the size, no matter the industry vertical that they work within. It should be right for any organization that operates within the UK. As before, there are still two different levels to Cyber Essentials. There is Cyber Essentials, otherwise known as Cyber Essentials Basic, which is effectively a self-assessment questionnaire. You answer the questions correctly, and you will walk away with the certificate for your organisation. Then there is slightly more demanding Cyber Essentials Plus, which builds on top of Cyber Essentials with actual verification that the controls have been implemented correctly. Now, those tests cover effectively 5 different areas. There's an external vulnerability assessment, whereby things like your public IP addresses will be scanned. There is an internal vulnerability assessment of a sample number of devices based on the operating system in use within your organization. There is account separation testing. That is to say, to make sure that end users don't have local admin rights in their PCs and their devices. Malware protection testing to make sure that devices correctly stop malware and viruses on devices. And then last but not least, there's multi-factor authentication testing completed. That is to ensure that when somebody does log into a cloud service, that a MFA prompt is seen. Now, the controls between the two levels are the same. There is no difference in the controls. So ultimately, if you as an organization can implement the controls needed for Cyber Essentials, there is no reason why you can't also pass Cyber Essentials Plus. The only difference is there is an assessor that evidences that the controls have been implemented correctly.
I think the bit that I'd say is, as a general rule, if you're undertaking Cyber Essentials properly and you're following all the criteria and filling out the specification as it's intended and in good faith, there's not really a reason why you shouldn't be able to apply for the Plus. The controls are the same across the board. It is literally just that case of having someone independently check with you, jump on a few systems, check some scans from your servers and some screenshots to make sure that you are doing what you say you're doing, especially with the sort of focus for a lot of things moving forward on the looking for Plus specification.
So thanks, guys. Some really great insight there into what the differences are between Cyber Essentials Plus, some of the key differences, etc. But I think one of the things that I work with customers all the time on is why get Cyber Essentials Plus, rather than it just being a shiny badge. What does it actually do? And there's kind of 4 key things that we really see as output from this. One of the key ones is insurers, right? So a bit like if you've got your car in a locked garage versus on a street that anyone can walk by, your insurance levels and premiums, etc., are going to be different. So the more regulatory compliance that you've got, the better your insurance policy will be. The next one is kind of regulated sectors. So particularly NHS, financial services, there are very strict rules and that you must have it. So that's not only impact to those particular customers in that industry, but if you are a company that provides end services to customers in those industries, it can be just as important to you if you're looking to win contracts or tenders, etc. When you've got high security work, so I've worked with multiple nuclear power plants and stuff, and this is just it's an absolute must, it's a given. So where you are being awarded a contract, you just have to have the Cyber Essentials Plus. And I've already talked about the supply chains when I was talking through the regulated sectors, but it's that kind of flow through. So where the end customer may have their rules, then in order to ever win business for yourself, and if you decide you want to go into those industries, that's where it will then affect you too. So those are the kind of 4 key reasons. And usually if I'm starting to begin to speak with a customer about Cyber Essentials Plus, usually a really good place to start is go see what you could be requoted from your insurer for your premiums. That can then often pay for not only the remediation and implementation, but then further contracts, etc. on top of it. So back over to you, Carly and Dan.
Yeah, so getting certified, there's nothing stopping any organisation from going on IASME's website. So IASME are the organisation that runs the Cyber Essentials scheme, and trying to do this yourself. It's quite a cheap and cheerful exercise. If you have your own internal IT, maybe your internal security team, you can do it completely self-serve. However, there can be quite a bit of value in using a partner like BCN. We are a certification body that works on behalf of IASME, and we can really help guide organisations through the process from end to end. We can help review if an organisation is ready for the assessment. We can help them remediate anything that needs to be implemented or put right before the assessment, and then go into the assessment knowing that they will pass. And not just pass, but pass with the controls implemented correctly, because that's when the Cyber Essentials scheme has real value to it, because knowing the controls are implemented correctly ensures that 80% reduction in cyber threats can be met.
Yeah, I think one of the key bits of feedback that we often get from clients where they've had a go at doing it themselves or they've used us is that, I mean, the benefit of us is that we do it day in and day out. We've seen, we've been through the weeds before. We've seen the gotchas. We've seen the weird and wonderful bits that strike you just before you're about to submit, and we can help identify those and, get them remediated in advance before you get halfway through the assessment and realize, that's come out of nowhere. The other bit as well is some of the wording on the questions can be a bit. It's a bit different, It's like filling out an insurance document, as as we've discussed. When you're looking at your house insurance document, and it says like, "How much is this?" That's a very good question. With Cyber Essentials, it's very much the same. It will say, "What do you have in place?" And most people will go, "Oh, I have this," but they'll often forget some of the other stuff that they've got along the way that's also adding to that. It's really important that you're covering off all those bits, all those weird and wonderful bits of software that you've got, all those technical controls. If you're using things like Intune, get them in the assessment, because it's all, it all helps carry the case forward.
Yeah, so thanks, Carly. Thanks, Dan, for that insight. So, obviously gone through what the Cyber Essentials is, what the Cyber Essentials Plus is, the reasons for doing it, and some of the pitfalls and things to look out for. And now we're going to move on to exactly what updates we've seen in this year's Cyber Essentials with the Danzell update. So I'm going to now hand back over to Carly and Dan.
Thanks, Emma. So the Danzell update came into effect back in April this year, and the changes to the requirements, in essence, are not really changes to the requirements. They're more changes to how the assessment is marked, in effect, because while there is additional information required during the assessment, especially around legal entities and the scope of Cyber Essentials, the actual technical controls haven't really changed this time around, but there is much more emphasis on what constitutes a automatic failure during the assessment. And there's two big changes in Danzell compared to the previous Willow scheme. Now, the first big change is around multi-factor authentication. We all know the part that multi-factor authentication now plays to keep cloud services secure, and the NCSC have pretty correctly, in my opinion, prescribed this now to be an auto-fail condition if it's not enabled within a cloud service. Previously under Willow, you could say that you don't have MFA enabled and still pass the assessment. Now you must have MFA enabled on all accounts within all cloud services in scope. And just to build on that a bit further, when we're talking about cloud services, this might not necessarily just be things like Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Azure. It will also include things like the organization's LinkedIn accounts, the organization's Facebook accounts, anything that is a cloud service that contains organizational data must be in scope and must have multi-factor authentication enabled.
And do you know what, Carly? I think that's a really interesting perspective that sometimes we all forget about is cloud services aren't just those like corporate enterprise business managed ones. It's ones that we use in our everyday life that people will have, on their desktops, on their endpoints, etc. So I think that's a really, critical piece to acknowledge there.
Absolutely. The other major change that is also now an auto-fail condition is around vulnerability management and vulnerability remediation. So previously, under the Willow scheme, there was 14 days to remediate vulnerabilities, but the testing during Cyber Essentials Plus was fairly relaxed, I would say. After a Cyber Essentials Plus test, you were previously given a certain amount of time to remediate the vulnerabilities found, and if you remediated those within the allowed time, you would achieve the certification, and that would be it. Under Danzell now, if vulnerabilities are found during the Cyber Essentials Plus assessment, you do still get time to remediate. However, you'll also be asked to evidence a second sample of devices, and that second sample has to be free of vulnerabilities as well. So it can't have any vulnerabilities in that second sample. And we'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. Dan, do you have anything to add around what has changed between Willow and Danzell?
I think from an assessor perspective, it's mainly clarifications. That's the key word here. Is all these controls still need to be in place before it's just we are looking into them more in depth. The MFA one is a very good point, and it's sort of a hybrid switch between the old Willow spec and this one. Is one common way that organisations used to get past was by allowing all computers within their on-site networks. So, for example, if you had a head office, you'd say, "Oh, well, I don't need to do MFA because these computers are trusted." That's no longer acceptable. To have MFA controls, it's not a trusted IP anymore. You need to have something like an authentication token. So YubiKeys are quite common. FIDO2 tokens of other brands are available. Authenticator apps and TOTP generators, and on the lesser scale, things like SMS and phone authentication. But you can't get away with just saying it's in the office network and it's trusted, because unfortunately the days of things just being in the office and being trusted are very much behind us.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Come on to some gotchas then. From your perspective as a assessor, Dan, dealing with Cyber Essentials day in, day out, is there anything that customers and organisations need to be aware of before going into a Cyber Essentials Plus assessment?
There's a few things that are definitely worth looking out for. So, checking your estate for software is a really good exercise in general, just to see what's actually needed and what's not needed. That, logically speaking, the more you have, the more you've got to watch over. It's a really good time to sort of see what you're using. Most businesses are using some sort of accountancy package, so Sage and Xero, quite common. Do you have users maybe using graphic suites like Adobe or Paint.net, things like that? Other people who've maybe accrued software over time, and you sort of start there thinking, they're not used anymore. Well, if they're not used, now's a good time to get rid of it, rather than having to A, probably purchase more licenses to update, and B, having to get it in and patched in the meantime. As we've touched on previously, thinking about what cloud services you actually use that are holding company data, LinkedIn accounts, YouTube accounts, socials, all that sort of fun stuff. Maybe, someone started a trial service with another cloud provider. Maybe you've got Dropbox accounts, all those things we need to be aware of. And likewise, on the topic of unknowns and whatnot, think about, service accounts that you might have. Do you have any things plugged into your network that maybe don't need to be there? Maybe that computer in the cabinet that's been sat running the door entry software needs updating. All those sorts of things are definitely worth looking out for. It's better to over consider and sort of over budget for it, and then find actually we don't need to touch it, as opposed to sort of thinking, well, it'll go through fine, and get into assessment day where you sat there with the assessor going, well, about that.
Okay, so we mentioned already earlier that Cyber Essentials Plus now has an auto-fill condition around vulnerabilities. So what this effectively now means is that organisations must do active vulnerability management. therefore, they're not just doing vulnerability management and remediation during the Cyber Essentials Plus assessment itself. It's a case of embedding that into your day-to-day operations, remediating vulnerabilities day in and day out across the year, not just during the assessment itself. Now, within Cyber Essentials Plus, the definition of a vulnerability that needs to be remediated is CVSS 7 or above. That means it's either high or critical in severity, and those vulnerabilities have to be remediated within a 14-day window. So if you embed that process into your organization and remediate all vulnerabilities, critical or high, within 14 days, you are doing active vulnerability management. If you're not doing that today, then you will need to start doing it within your organization in order to pass Cyber Essentials Plus under the Danzell scheme. And we'll go into a little bit more detail as to why next. So double sampling. This is really where Cyber Essentials Plus now has some real teeth under the Danzell scheme, because if you are found to have vulnerabilities, critical or high, older than 14 days during your Cyber Essentials Plus assessment, you will be given time to remediate those during the initial assessment. And once remediated, you will submit a clean vulnerability report. But then you'll also be asked to submit what's known as a double sample, a second sample of the same size of devices. And if vulnerabilities are found in that second sample, not only will you fail your Cyber Essentials Plus assessment, but you'll have your original Cyber Essentials self-assessment revoked, and therefore your organisation won't have Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus certificate, and you'll have to start the entire process again from the beginning.
I think it's the double samples a really important bit. I know previously a lot of businesses will have just patched that sample and gone, oh yeah, we're all good to go now. The other bit is getting your patching schemes in place beforehand puts you in a much better position. There's nothing worse than having to do it after the fact, A, because it's pressurised, and B, as you'll find with a lot of businesses, getting a hold of people can be quite tricky once the assessment's underway, because obviously people have very important roles and people are on holiday and stuff. Your patching mentality and your vulnerability management mentality needs to be in the idea of sort of doing it as soon as possible, not just getting it, oh, we'll get it right in at the end of the 14 days. It's fine, don't need to worry about it. You need to be taking it straight from the start as soon as you can do. Good asset management also works in line with that. So making sure that you've got your VMR solution on everything that you're using is very, very important.
So yeah, thanks for that insight, guys. And I guess if I put my account management hat on for a moment, my client is all I care about, right? And this 14-day window that's come in, this really is a game changer in this whole kind of Cyber Essentials Plus area, and it's something that's really going to catch people unawares. So we're making sure we're proactively making sure our customers are aware, because before it was more like a tick box. We're really pleased from a kind of IT services provider perspective this has come in, because cyber attack is just so prevalent in the world now. So this will ensure that companies are better protected, but it's definitely going to be a gotcha and something that people need to really be aware of. So thanks for really articulating that well, guys.
Thanks, Emma. I think it's important to point out we are also seeing a huge increase in the amount of vulnerabilities that are disclosed currently. Much of this is down to large language models, the ability to detect flaws within software. This is trickling down to more vulnerabilities, which means more remediation in effect. So realistically, what this means is that things like 30-day patching windows are no longer sufficient for organizations. Organizations need to be patching daily, weekly, depending on what they're doing, but always within this 14-day window, because that's what the scheme demands.
So I guess, now looking at the takeaway, we've gone into a few different detail about the different parts of Danzell. So what does it actually mean for you? So currently, if you already hold Cyber Essentials, you've just got to do a little bit more homework. There's a little bit more detail. There's some more legal entity information that's got to be provided. Remember, it's across all cloud services. And it's also mandatory across your whole supply chain. So even if your very bottom of your food or supply chain is just one small independent, you need to make sure your whole supply chain is covered. So I guess that's the kind of real takeaway and what it means for you. And if you're going for plus, there is actually more significant change. So you need to give yourself time to prepare. We've heard and we've really tried to emphasize today about the vulnerability management. Patching alone isn't going to fix the issues that you might have in order to be able to secure this status, and you have to be audit ready. So don't wait for the initial assessment to then rectify things. Be as proactive as you can in advance of that. So I think, those are kind of the key things, unless Dan, there's anything you'd like to add.
I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there. The Danzell scheme's not, providing you've got all the controls are in place, it's just making sure that you're doing them properly and making sure that you are hitting that 14 days. If maybe you've been a bit more lax in the past, now's your really big opportunity to make sure you're getting in there and going in strong and dealing with it in the way that the scheme's expecting. Because the assessment, for today it's Danzell, next year or next spec, it's only going one way and it's not going to be easier. It's not going to be more lax. We are looking at higher restrictions because it is a different threat landscape.
So as the Cyber Essentials Plus scheme now requires active vulnerability management, we often find it takes some time to embed that process into organizations. And the larger the organization, the longer it's going to take to properly embed that, simply because larger organizations are going to have more software, more devices. Therefore, you'll probably have more things to patch, and you'll have to define how those things are patched and when. So we're advising organizations who are up to around 50 staff, start 30 days ahead of where you would have normally started. Organizations that are up to 250 staff, start 60 to 2 months ahead of where you would normally have started for Cyber Essentials Plus. And anything bigger, anything over 250 staff, start 3 months ahead of your Cyber Essentials Plus renewal, because it really will take time to embed vulnerability management processes within your organization.
Excellent. And I guess, guys, if there's then just one thing, so like some hints and tips from you're doing this across customers, prospects, are there particular hints or particular tips that you would recommend? Dan, maybe if I come to you first on that.
Yeah, so, and this sort of applies across all security schemes, but particularly for Cyber Essentials is, as Carly said, as yourself has said, make sure you're getting those VMR systems in as soon as you can do, make sure they're applied across all servers. Really embed it in sort of your HR policies and your, user liaison policies. It's, don't forget these controls apply to any device accessing your corporate data. So start having those conversations with your workforce about updating your devices, making sure that they're aware of what apps they're using on the mobile phones. Obviously, there's limits as to where you can go there, but, make sure that you're having those discussions. Getting your HR in place, making sure you've got new user forms, leaver forms, and good documented process around how those things are managed and how you're delegating permissions is super duper important. On the more technical side, if you are working sort of overseeing the IT team or you're working with managed service providers, now's the time to start looking at what software you're using, what cloud services you've got. Maybe if you've got any aging device in this fleet, which, maybe have been missed out from software in the past, really start looking at, your device like lifecycle management, how that incorporates into your patching windows and, maybe tightening the bolts in a few areas, but not just for the scheme, but to continue there afterwards. The key bit is continue it afterwards. Do not just do it for the scheme and then, relax off the gas. You need to keep at it and keep doing it. The more you do, the easier it gets.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. And I think, one final thing from me is often people put this on IT's shoulders. You can't increase your sales if you've got end customers that are in industries where you have to have these certifications. It's really important that you have other stakeholders within the business supporting this. So it might be your CFO from an insurance perspective, cost perspective. It might be your head of sales or your director of sales, or your COO from a what client base can we reach out to? We need this certification to be able to survive and grow as a business. So this is not just an IT or a security function issue. It's about looking at this as a company-wide overall. I think that's the kind of one hint or tip I would have as well. So I would just like to thank you to both Carly and Dan today for those fantastic insights. The next steps, raise the bar yourselves as a company, raise the bar in your supply chain. And we're very happy to support you in that journey by booking in a cyber advisor session. We can, spend a focused hour talking through some of these things and exactly how this would be pertinent to you and your business. And we'd be very happy to follow up on that. So thank you very much for tuning in. Please do reach out if we can be of any more support. Thank you and goodbye.